Welcome again to Coastal Matters. This is a monthly program co-produced by the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy with Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18. I'm Charlie Walters. My guest today is Roberto Santamaria, who is the Health Director for the Town of Nantucket. Welcome to the show, Roberto.
Happy to be here, Charlie. Thank you.
Let's start at the beginning. What are your duties exactly?
Well, the health department duties are very vast. We monitor and evaluate all the food establishments, all the housing establishments, lodging that we have. We permit tobacco. We enforce tobacco regulations. We monitor vaccine rates. We monitor outbreaks and disease rates in the island and in our county here as well. And then on top of that, we look at a lot of the environmental health aspects like coastal waters, discharge, anything like that. We all do pay attention to all of this stuff. So the joke that we say a lot is, if police, fire, or DPW doesn't do it, we do.
So some of your work, you're out in the field, so to speak, checking up on whatever regulation you happen to be checking up on that day. But a lot of it is looking at data in your office.
Yes, there is a lot of data that we do. We monitor every septic system on the island, including the innovative alternative septic systems, which are a direct contributor to groundwater. And a lot of that is database-based. And then every single day I check what's called the Massachusetts Virtual Epidemiologic Network. We call it MAVEN, to monitor disease, illness and disease rates on the island as well.
Let me take a detour here. Lyme disease, getting worse, getting better, not changing?
Actually, this year was very low. This summer was very low. We had only about 167 cases. Still very high in comparison to the rest of the country, but compared to last year's over 300, it's a huge drop. It's a huge drop.
And how do you account for that?
We had actually a very dry year. The drought was a major contributor to that. The ticks that come out, all tick-borne diseases, ticks tend to be more active after a rainfall. So it has to be both warm and wet for them to be mostly active. On years like this year where it was very dry, they're not really as active as people would expect.
So are you saying that even though the number of reported Lyme disease cases were about halved in 2016, that doesn't mean there are fewer ticks necessarily.
Exactly.
It just means they're not up and around causing problems.
Exactly right. Exactly right. If we get rainfall every week for next summer, those tick-borne diseases may be even at record highs.
What if we get a really snowy winter, which I'm told we're supposed to get? Does that affect anything?
Yes, it does. It actually may increase the numbers as the snow melts and as the temperatures get warmer. It'll saturate the ground with the water that they need.
Even if it's a dry summer then, a dry summer following a wet winter, you would still expect to see tick problems?
We would see a little bit higher activity in the early season. As everything dries out and as it gets hotter, they will lose some of their activity, but unfortunately the damage will have already been done. The activity that we're worried about isn't necessarily when just the tick gets onto the human being, but their activity in the spring months when they're getting attached to the mice and to the deer that are becoming more active, and that's where they actually get infected with these diseases. And then when they are active in the summer during the hiking, that's how they get onto human beings.
Now you mentioned tobacco.
Yes.
What happens if somebody sells a pack of cigarettes to a 12-year-old?
No, it's the state tobacco laws allow us to fine over $300 per incidence per day that they are in violation. If they get caught selling to a minor, the first time we are allowed to we can fine them or suspend them.
And this is you, not the police department.
This will be us on their permits, specifically their permit to supply tobacco. It is us, and we are allowed to suspend them even on a first basis, and then we are actually able to revoke their permit to sell, depending on the egregious nature of the action.
And that's your personal decision. It's not a higher up somewhere on Beacon Hill or anything.
It could be our personal decision as the registered sanitarian doing the inspection. However, the owner is allowed to appeal to the Board of Health. If the Board of Health decides to overturn it, well, we'll live with that. But if the Board of Health decides to keep the suspension or revocation, then they are able to appeal to the Superior Court. But There's nothing higher than that in our case. So the Board of Health now is a independent body. We have 5 very good members. Dr. Malcolm McNabb as the chair, Stephen Visco as the vice chair, Helene Weld, James Cooper, and then Rick Atherton, who is the Board of Selectmen liaison.
So who are you answerable to? Who do you report to?
Yes. So day-to-day operation, I report directly to Libby Gibson,
Town manager.
the town manager. And then for any policy-related decisions and for any enforcement actions, the enforcement of the regulations, we answer to the Board of Health. And the Board of Health answers directly to the state.
Can the state leapfrog the Board of Health or whomever and come down here and tell you to do something or not do something?
Yes.
They do have the authority to do that.
Yes, they do have the authority to do that.
And who is that? I mean, what agency is that?
The Massachusetts Department of Public Health. It also depends on where the regulation sits. So for septic systems, for example, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection will be able to leapfrog the Board of Health and tell us what to do with that.
On Nantucket, we're unique in that the town and the county are the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I assume your jurisdiction includes Tuckernuck and Muskeget, for example.
Yes, it does.
And how often are you lucky enough to get over there?
So far, none. No times. We usually tend to get out to Tuckernuck if there is some sort of a septic system issue. But other than that, we really don't end up out there. And when we do go out there, we have to enlist the services of our harbor master and borrow one of their boats and have her bring us over and back. So it's really interesting.
Muskeget, there are an awful lot of seals over there,
Yes.
I'm told. Does that become a public health issue for you?
So far, it's not. It's not a public health issue right now because the currents really take care of a lot of the waste from there. There's an old adage in public health called the solution to pollution is dilution. Because of the issues and the currents out in Muskeget, we don't see a lot of the pollutants that they drop off there. But if they were to be inside the harbor, then we have a problem. Waste created by large masses of animals can actually destroy the life in a harbor. So far, it's not an issue for us. It does attract some shark activity, and I know it makes a few people nervous thanks to the movie from almost 40 years ago now, good old Jaws. But the chances of being attacked by a shark are very low.
When the seals are ashore,
Yes.
what about the beaches?
Yeah, they can definitely pollute the beaches. We haven't really been seeing a lot of that. It hasn't had much of an effect of any of our outer bank beaches, so none of the south side beaches, none of the upper beaches, because of the currents and the shifting of the water there. It can definitely pollute the beach itself. Nobody really enjoys being at a beach with waste on it. So we do recommend that people call in when they see either the dead seals or the seal waste or things like that. They let us know whether it's the Board of Health, the Harbor Master, Natural Resources. As long as the town knows, we'll be able to respond. But we haven't been seeing many public health issues. Don't go near them.
No.
We don't recommend anyone pose for a selfie with a seal.
Well, it's also a legal question, isn't it?
Exactly.
What do you do you can't go out there and clean it up, obviously.
No, in some of the other towns that I've worked in, when the geese took care of some of our beaches, our bathing beaches in the ponds, we actually would have to go out and rake it
Really?
out. Here on the island, luckily that doesn't fall under the health department to do that. I honestly do not know who responds to the waste itself, but we do definitely need to know when it's there.
Now, as I understand it, Muskeget is partly privately owned, partly town-owned.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any difference to your responsibilities?
Actually, yes and no. That's a multifaceted question. Yes, because we have to respond to all of the town-owned water. So the town owns the beaches. So when we go out there and we do own that water, the shoreline, So in the situations that we do respond out there, not necessarily the health department, but the town as a whole, we do have to respond to incidents and issues over on the beaches itself. If it's an issue of waste or animal waste in general or situations like that on the private land, unfortunately the town is not able to go onto the private property to clean anything up because of legal issues, trespassing issues, things like that.
Even if you're invited to come on by the owner, would that make a difference?
It's still a legal issue because if something that happens, any damage that happens to the property or to any town property itself, we start working on liability problems there.
Let me go with this for a minute. Now, out at Great Point, where the seals tend to hang out at certain times,
Yes.
I assume they're getting onto fish and wildlife land near the the lighthouse. What happens then? You've got a federal agency who owns that property.
We tend to coordinate pretty well because of the nature of us being on an island. We have to work together. In my experience, when the Coast Guard and the town have pretty good communication, you're right with the fish and wildlife issues. They tend to respond mostly to their own. If there's something there and we give them a call, they'll just respond. Vice versa as well. So we have this pretty good symbiotic relationship working out there. So,
is there a typical day in your life as health inspector? And if so, what sorts of things might we see you doing?
So a typical day starts at 7:30 in the morning when we open the office. We go in, we check the emails and the voicemails that we've received over the weekend or the course of the night before. Then from there, we tend to prioritize our days. So we have in the summer seasons, we have 2 inspectors, the assistant director, and our office manager, as well as myself. So what we do is we tend to prioritize the work. So the 2 seasonal inspectors, Kathy Lefebvre and Hank Ross, they coordinate to see which restaurants they're going to inspect that day, what complaints they've received. Are they going to inspect housing issues? Are they have to respond to septic system issues? Artel and myself tend to coordinate a lot of Artel Crowley, the assistant director, we tend to coordinate the septic system reviews, all of the plan reviews for septic systems, a lot of the plan reviews for new restaurants that are opening, permitting issues. Ann Barrett, who is our office manager, really keeps this machine going. She coordinates all of the permits, all of our phone calls, all of the complaints. She tracks all of our inspections. She schedules them if we need to. And then a typical day for myself, once we coordinate and prioritize and do the work, the inspection work, so that we know where we're going to be, a lot of my day is also taken up with reviewing internal policies and standard operating procedures. Right now I'm currently working on a 5-year strategic plan for the office. I've recently tried to implement some of the Six Sigma efficiency work so that we can eliminate waste into the office. So I am working on doing some of that and implementing that into our office so that we can have a more efficient and effective office. Right now we're in budgeting season, so writing our new budgets and see how that will fit with the town's 5-year plan as well as with my office's 5-year plan. Having those two mesh is a full-time job by itself, not to mention just the inspections and the other policy issues that we're working on as well.
You're at 3 East Chestnut, is that correct?
3 East Chestnut, across the street from Sushi by Yoshi.
And would you say you spend more time in the office or out of the office?
As the new position has dictated me stay more in the office right now, fixing up the policy issues and policy loopholes that we've been finding in some of our regulations. I do go out on inspections a couple times a week. Those inspections can last anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 or 4 hours, depending on the nature of what it is we find. I do find myself out in the field. I would like to be out in the field a little bit more often than I am right now. But it can be a full-time inside the office if I really wanted it to, because it's that much work that we have to track.
I want to get into specific areas of the island that I want to hear comments from you about. But before that, where were you before you were here? Where did you study and where did you grow up?
So I was born and raised in Florida. I went to the University of Central Florida there, and I just received my bachelor's degrees in molecular biology and microbiology, and I had a minor in chemistry. While I was there, I was working in a laboratory doing analytical chemistry work for 3 years. And I also worked part-time at the Environmental Health and Safety Office, which was my first foray into public health. The director of the EHS office was a master's in public health. So I was studying to be a doctor. I wanted to be an ophthalmologist. And my junior year, I realized medicine wasn't for me. I had already applied to medical schools the summer between my junior and senior year. I had already applied to medical schools. I'd taken my MCATs. I've gone through the torture of it all, and I realized I didn't want to be a doctor. So quickly, I had to find a new career. And I knew that with a bachelor's degree in a pure science, I needed to continue on to grad school. So my choice, I was in a fork of the road of whether going to laboratory sciences or something else. And while I was talking to my boss at EHS, he mentioned public health. So I started researching it. I liked it. I had already taken an epidemiology course. So I applied to Boston University, and I was accepted there, and I started there in 2009. And I did my master's in public health in epidemiology and biostatistics. And I graduated there in 2011. In the time that I was at BU, I started as an intern in the city of Everett, and
Just north of Boston.
just north of Boston. And my director there, Heidi Porter, she kept me on as an emergency preparedness coordinator. And I got really lucky. And in that March of 2011, she moved to the Bedford Department of Health.
Bedford, Mass.
Bedford, Massachusetts. And the mayor of the city of Everett came down, and he was trying to split up the work so that we can fill in the gaps at the time. And he looks at me and he goes, you're getting your master's in public health, correct? I said, yes. He goes, in what? I said, epidemiology and biostatistics. You're acting director till further notice. And he walked out. I had just turned 24 2 months earlier. And all of a sudden, I find myself going from intern to the director of the department, and no less being the youngest director in the state of Massachusetts. And so when I graduated in May of 2011, already as the director of public health for the city of Everett. So I was there for 2.5 years, and while I was there, I realized I was missing some of the management portion. So I went back to school, and I got my master's in business. In general management, so that I can learn a lot of the management issues that I didn't learn and how to apply them. So in November of 2013, I was given an opportunity to work with my mentor in Framingham, Massachusetts, in Metro West of Boston. So I took a position as a deputy director in Framingham, working under Stephen Ward, who was my mentor. And we were there working together, rebuilding an office for about a year, and then he retired and gave the reins to me. And I was the director of public health in Framingham for about a year until this position opened up. And you can't pass up an opportunity to work in Nantucket. So I applied and really definitely loved it here. And when Libby offered me the job, of course I jumped on it.
Now, this is quite a change from Everett, Massachusetts.
Yes, it is.
In any number of ways.
Yes, it is. The demographics are definitely different. The feel from a very dense city to this open paradise that we have here on the island, it's a huge change. It's a huge change. Change politically from a city form of government to a town form of government, as well as the urban environment issues that we found there with housing and contamination, hazardous waste contamination, a lot of hazardous waste. Monsanto was out in Everett for a long time, and so was General Electric. To going down to water quality issues here on the island, and the engineering of septic systems and sewer, and it's just a different world. And
No prospective casinos on Nantucket.
and no prospective casinos on Nantucket, that's for sure. The casino bid actually came in right before I left, and we were working on a health impact assessment while I was there. And it's casinos' personal opinion for myself is, for public health wise, it's a detrimental situation, especially in the location of where it is. But you can't deny the tax base that it's going to bring. And Steve Wynn has completely cleaned up the old Monsanto site on his own dime, something that the city of Everett was never able to afford to do. It was over a $20 million cleanup to remove all the contaminated soil and to dredge out the harbor area. You can't fight that. He's bringing in a health-related, an environmental health thing that Everett has never seen before. And quite honestly, they deserve it, being an old factory town. Having it cleaned up is something that the city of Everett deserves. I'm really happy to see it being cleaned, even if it is by a casino.
Well, let's move to Nantucket.
Yes, sir.
I've got a list of issues, and I just want to get your feedback, comments, insight, whatever, from the point of view of the health officer.
Yes, sir.
Vehicular traffic downtown in July and August. Never mind the inconvenience part of it, but as a public health issue, should it be a public health issue?
It becomes a public health issue because the large amount of traffic is there, reduces the access to people being able to walk, the pedestrian access. In the public health world, we call these social determinants of health. If a pedestrian doesn't feel safe in the area that they're walking, they're not going to walk. They're going to choose vehicles, therefore increasing that vehicle burden in the downtown area. Not to mention the pollution aspects, runoff. The vehicles are always leaking oil, no matter how well maintained it is. A vehicle will always leak oils. They will always leak benzene rings. These are highly carcinogenic things. And when we get a large rainfall, all of that runs right off into our storm drains. So from a public health aspect, purely environmental health portion, it is a detrimental part to burn so much fossil fuels as well as using that many vehicles. From a community health perspective, pedestrian access is more important than the convenience of being in a car, in my opinion.
Well, how bad is the air pollution on a really busy traffic day in July or August? How bad is the pollution compared to a city?
Well, we're not collecting data on that. It's a good point, actually. It's something that we might want to collect. But I would compare it to probably a small city. It reminds me a lot of my time in Everett. There's a lot of idling. There's a lot of vehicular traffic here. Everett was 48,000 people, 47,000 people.
But surrounded by other communities that are that size or larger.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But with Nantucket, we're looking at, in the summer, close to 60,000 people here, all of them in idling vehicles.
I would say more than that.
Maybe more than that, yes, especially on the heavier days.
Yes.
We plan a lot emergency-wise for 100,000 people.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. We have to plan for around 100,000 as far as the health goes when we do our what we call our strategic national stockpile drills, for in case there's ever some sort of a outbreak, how we can dispense vaccines or things like that. We calculate for 100,000 people.
Now, flooding in the downtown area over the last 25 or 30 years has become a more frequent event. I think back in the 80s or 90s, someone remarked that we'd had 2 or 3 500-year storms within about 5 or 6 years. Brand Point will flood. The Strip area near Steamboat Wharf will flood, sometimes by the Stop and Shop parking lot, et cetera, et cetera. From a public health standpoint, is that a problem to have frequent flooding from the harbor?
Yes. What the a lot of people don't realize is that we have a lot of salt marsh mosquitoes here, and mosquito-borne diseases are all over the news right now. Zika is one of them. Luckily we don't have the mosquito that carries Zika here on the island.
Would it surprise you if it got here?
It would actually surprise me because the Aedes aegypti mosquito is located in more tropical areas.
Okay.
So right now it is still narrowed down to the south of the United States. Can we get an imported case or a few imported mosquitoes? Yes, but they won't necessarily proliferate up here.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have West Nile virus and we do have Eastern equine encephalitis, and those are carried by the mosquitoes we do have on the island. So when we have flooding in the salt marshes and in the catch basins and things like that, and then the water starts standing there, it only takes 24 to 48 hours for a mosquito to lay eggs and for them to start hatching and swarming. And we start getting mosquito-borne issues.
Do we get harbor pollutants that stay in place further away from the shore even when the water goes back, recedes?
Luckily, the island has mostly sand, especially in the filled areas in town, so it drains pretty quickly. The persistent chemical pollutants, certain chemicals like chlorines and aldehydes and stuff, of course, will stay in the area. Luckily, a lot of them break down with UV light, so as the sun is pounding down on it, these chemicals start to break down. The byproducts of these chemicals do run back off into these areas. So we do see some persistent chemical pollutants. Luckily, DPW is very good at keeping track of all our catch basins and vacuuming them out after these major flood events to make sure that it's running properly and that they don't persist in our land here.
Is alternative energy in your purview at all for any reason?
It's not in our purview as far as enforcement goes, but it is definitely part of the community health aspects of what we look at. Alternative energy, it's huge. It's a huge factor in health. When you burn fossil fuels, you're creating a lot of particulate matters. It's aside from the CO2 and greenhouse gases and global warming issues that people are bringing up, you also are breathing in particulate matter. When you combust anything, if it's a pure hydrocarbon, it'll break down into CO2 and water, but you're never burning pure hydrocarbons. So you're getting a lot of these, basically you're breathing in ash. So the more fossil fuels you use, the higher carcinogenic rates you see. Alternative energy is a major portion in bringing these long-term chronic diseases, chronic illnesses down. So we fully endorse alternative energy.
We're taping this show in early October, which means it's just before special town meeting.
Yes.
And odds are that the overwhelming majority of people will not have seen this show until after town meeting. Keeping all that in mind, is there anything you want to say about the Nantucket Sewer Project, which will have been voted on by the time we go on the air?
Well, hopefully the island will have paid attention to the facts of our water issues here, our water quality issues in Nantucket, and voted yes on Article 2. Sewering Nantucket is a very important thing to do. Since the 1990s, the Horsley Witten and Hegeman reports that we received in 1990 specifically said, under their current zoning, the zoning from 26 years ago, if we were to build it all out, we need to bring sewer and town water into Nantucket because the groundwater is too high there and the contamination will be too much. And that's 26-year-old zoning. The zoning has changed since then, and it's become more dense. So in essence, we've created the situation that we're in. So I'm seeing well water reports in Nantucket that have high nitrate levels. Nitrates are directly associated with septic systems. And these are people's drinking water. Their drinking water is coming out of the ground with septic system effluent in it. And it still meets the Massachusetts Drinking Water Act and the federal EPA's Drinking Water Act, but when you really think about it, do you really want to be drinking septic system effluent? And then a lot of questions are being brought up about brackish water coming up. The positive pressure from the septic systems is keeping the brackish water down. Well, with sea level rising, it's going to happen, whether we sewer it or not. There will always, the wells are going to start failing in Nantucket due to saltwater intrusion. Unless the world as a whole stops this global warming issue and sea level rise, all the wells are going to start failing within our generation.
Let's stick with water, but from a different angle. Keeping the harbor, Nantucket Harbor, clean is obviously a priority for everyone. Nantucket Harbor, same thing. But I'm wondering about water quality issues around Nantucket that don't involve those two harbors. Say the north side of Cove 2 or Town of Nantucket or whatever it happens to be. I assume it's something you keep an eye on, but obviously you don't have to watch over it as carefully as the other areas.
We don't have to watch over it as carefully as the two estuaries right now, but they are definitely next on the list. We do have to pay attention to these areas. We've been enforcing our fertilizer regulation a little bit heavier this year. We're looking to increase education and make sure that landscapers and gardeners are paying attention to these fertilizing regulations, getting this information out to the property owners as well for the best management practices. Because all the fertilizer runoff, if you over-fertilize your property, it all goes straight into our aquifer, and it all goes straight into our streams and ponds. That increases algae blooms, creates fish kills. It also makes the water just unswimmable, let alone drinkable. So we have to watch all of it. We work really closely with the Natural Resources Department to monitor this, and we're in constant communication because any sort of algal bloom in these other bodies of water can be dangerous for any living being.
And this applies to ponds, I assume, and for the herring run in Nantucket, and for Phillips Run and Tom Niver's Head, and any place where there's water, whether it's ocean water or not.
Exactly, and this runoff is a major non-point source pollution into all our waters here. So we have to pay attention to fertilizer, we have to pay attention to septic systems, and we have to pay attention to stormwater runoff from all our roads. It's a large, comprehensive plan that we have to look at.
Let me finish up with this question. There's an area in Nantucket where waves were washing over the dunes sometime in the last year. If you cross Millie's Bridge and look to your left, there's, I guess it's part of Nantucket Harbor, and then there's a pretty narrow area separating it from the ocean. If that breaks through on a permanent basis, it would create an island at the western end. But it would also mean that you have the ocean coming into Hither Creek and all that. From a health issue standpoint, what does that mean?
So there are two things with that. If a breach, we actually did have the SMAST run these models in case there is a breach. If a breach happens in that area, the sands shift so quickly in front of it that the breach, according to the SMAST scientists, the breach should seal itself again within a very short period of time. So we're not too worried about it being completely isolated. If a flush of Hither Creek were to happen in a breach and then it would come back out, it would be really good for Hither Creek actually, because it's kind of like when we open up the ponds, Sagacha and Hummock, where it just comes out, we allow some of the pollutants out and then it'll flush back out. But it still won't solve the issues. Hither Creek is considered fully eutrophic, which means there's an increased amount of algal blooms in there, increased amount of weed growth due to nutrient loading. So even if we were to flush it out in a breach, once that breach closes, Hither Creek goes right back to where it was. It's not a permanent change.
Roberto Santamaria, thanks for coming on the show today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
For Coastal Matters, I'm Charlie Walters. Thank you for tuning in. Please tune in again next time.